Mother Bear soothed a burned child and sped it to the hospital. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a soft blanket. An 8-year-old Riley Chen pressed her small face against the cool window of her grandmother's cabin. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched the tall pine trees sway in the gentle breeze. The cabin sat at the very edge of Millbrook, where civilization met the wild, and Riley loved everything about this magical place. "Grandma Luna, can I go pick berries today?" Riley asked, turning away from the window. Her grandmother was stirring something that smelled like cinnamon on the old wood stove. "Maybe later, little one. The forest is waking up, and mama bears are teaching their cubs how to find food." "We don't want to disturb them," Grandma Luna replied, her weathered hands moving the wooden spoon in slow circles. Riley had heard stories about the bears. Some people in town were scared of them, but Grandma Luna always said they were just trying to live their lives, same as everyone else. The old woman had lived in this cabin for 47 years, and she claimed she understood the forest better than most people understood their own backyards. The cabin was small but cozy, with hand-carved furniture and quilts that told stories of 3 generations. Riley's parents had dropped her off for the summer while they traveled for work, and she couldn't have been happier. Here, she could hear owls at night and watch deer drink from the small stream that ran behind the house. As Riley helped her grandmother prepare breakfast, neither of them noticed a large brown shape moving slowly through the trees about 50 feet from their back door. The bear paused, lifting her massive head to catch the scent of cooking food, but something else held her attention. Her cub, barely 6 months old, was playing near a fallen log, completely unaware that he was moving closer and closer to the human's territory. The mother bear's name, if bears had noms the way humans did, might have been Sage. She was 7 years old, which made her wise in bear years, and this was her second cub. Her first had been taken by hunters 2 winters ago, and since then she had been extra protective of this little one. She watched him tumble and play, her heart full of the kind of love that transcends species. Riley was spreading jam on a piece of toast when she heard a sound that made her freeze. It wasn't quite a cry, but it wasn't quite a growl either. It was something in between, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Grandma, did you hear that?" But Grandma Luna was already moving toward the back door, her face serious. She had lived here long enough to know the difference between normal forest sounds and something that meant trouble. The sound came again, closer this time, and it was definitely coming from a young animal in distress. "Stay inside, Riley," her grandmother said quietly, but Riley was already following her to the door. What they saw made both of them gasp. The bear cub had somehow gotten his paw stuck between 2 rocks near the stream. He was crying in that heartbreaking way that young animals do when they're scared and hurt, and his mother was pacing back and forth, trying to figure out how to help him. The mother bear looked up and saw the 2 humans standing in the doorway. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. Riley could hear her own heartbeat, and she was sure the bear could hear it too. The animal's dark eyes seemed to be studying them, trying to decide if they were friends or enemies. Then, something extraordinary happened. The mother bear took 2 steps toward the cabin and made a sound that was almost like a whimper. She looked at Riley and her grandmother, then back at her cub, then back at them again. "She's asking for help," Grandma Luna whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like this." Riley felt her heart racing, but not from fear. There was something about the way the mother bear looked at them that made her feel trusted, chosen even. The bear's eyes held intelligence and desperation, and Riley found herself taking a step forward. "Riley, no," her grandmother said softly, but she didn't sound truly worried. There was something in the air, something that told them both that this moment was different from anything that had ever happened before. The cub's cries were getting weaker, and Riley could see that his paw was swelling. If they didn't help soon, the little one might lose his paw, or worse. The mother bear seemed to understand this too, because she took another step closer to the humans and made that pleading sound again. What happened next would change everything for Riley, her grandmother, and the two bears. But none of them knew that yet. All they knew was that in this moment, the invisible line between human and wild had somehow disappeared, and they were all just mothers and children, trying to help each other survive. The morning mist was starting to lift, and the sun was painting everything in soft golden light. It should have been a peaceful scene, but Riley could feel that something big was about to happen. Something that would test everything she thought she knew about courage, kindness, and the mysterious ways that love can bridge even the widest gaps. Riley's hands trembled as she watched the mother bear's pleading eyes. The animal was massive, probably weighing more than 3 grown men combined, but there was something so gentle in her expression that Riley felt drawn to her instead of afraid. The cub's whimpering was getting softer, which somehow made it even more heartbreaking. "What do we do, Grandma?" Riley whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rushing stream. Grandma Luna stood perfectly still for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Her mind was racing through 47 years of forest wisdom, trying to remember if she had ever heard of anything like this happening before. Bears were intelligent creatures, she knew that, but this level of trust and communication was something that belonged in fairy tales, not real life. "We help," she said finally, her voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. "But we move very slowly, and we let her lead." The mother bear seemed to understand that they had agreed to help, because she backed away from her cub and sat down heavily, giving them space to work. Her massive head tilted to one side as she watched them approach, and Riley could swear she saw gratitude in those dark, intelligent eyes. As they got closer to the trapped cub, Riley could see the problem more clearly. The little bear had been playing near the stream when his paw slipped between 2 large rocks that had probably been there since before her grandmother was born. The rocks were smooth from years of water flowing over them, which made the cub's paw slide down even further when he tried to pull it out. "The more he struggles, the tighter it gets," Grandma Luna observed, kneeling down beside the rocks. The cub looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young animal, as if he understood that these strange, furless creatures might be his only hope. Riley knelt down on the other side and gently placed her small hand on the cub's head. His fur was incredibly soft, softer than any stuffed animal she had ever owned, and she could feel his tiny heart beating fast with fear and exhaustion. The moment her hand touched him, something extraordinary happened. The cub stopped struggling and looked directly into her eyes, as if he was trying to tell her something important. "He's not just scared," Riley said quietly. "He's embarrassed. He knows his mama is worried, and he feels bad for getting stuck." Grandma Luna looked at her granddaughter with surprise. "How do you know that, sweetie?" "I just do," Riley replied, and she couldn't explain it any better than that. But somehow, looking into the cub's eyes, she could feel his emotions as clearly as if he were speaking to her in perfect English. The mother bear made a soft chuffing sound, and both humans looked up at her. She was pointing with her massive paw toward a pile of smaller rocks near the stream's edge, then back toward her cub's trapped paw. It took a moment, but then Grandma Luna understood. "She wants us to use the smaller rocks to prop up the big ones, create more space for the cub to pull his paw out," she said with amazement. "She's showing us how to solve the problem." They worked together for the next 20 minutes, carefully placing small stones as wedges around the larger rocks. The mother bear watched every move they made, occasionally making sounds that seemed like suggestions or approval. Riley found herself talking to the cub in a soft, soothing voice, telling him about her life in the city, about her parents who traveled for work, about how much she loved staying with Grandma Luna. "My mom always says that when something scary happens, we should breathe deep and think about the people who love us," Riley told the cub as she positioned another wedge stone. "Your mama loves you so much. Look how brave she's being, trusting us to help you." The cub seemed to relax even more at the sound of her voice, and Riley felt a connection forming that she had never experienced with any animal before. It was as if they were having a real conversation, even though neither of them spoke the other's language. Finally, they had created enough space between the rocks. Grandma Luna looked at the mother bear and nodded toward the cub. "Okay, Mama, tell your baby to pull gently." The mother bear made a series of soft sounds, and the cub began to slowly work his paw free. Riley held her breath, afraid that after all their work, the little one might still be stuck. But then, with a small pop, the paw came free. The cub immediately ran to his mother, who began licking his face and checking his paw with her huge tongue. Riley expected them to disappear into the forest immediately, grateful but ready to return to their wild life. Instead, something happened that made her heart skip a beat. The mother bear stood up on her hind legs, making herself even more enormous than she already was, and Riley's first instinct was to run. But then she realized the bear wasn't trying to be threatening. She was trying to be impressive, trying to communicate something important. The bear dropped back down to all fours and walked slowly toward Riley. Every step made the ground tremble slightly, and Riley could smell the wild scent of pine needles and earth that clung to the animal's fur. When the bear was close enough that Riley could see her own reflection in those dark eyes, the massive creature did something that took everyone's breath away. She bowed. It was unmistakable. The great bear lowered her head and front shoulders toward Riley in a gesture of respect and gratitude that seemed to come from some ancient understanding between species. Riley felt tears starting in her eyes, overwhelmed by the honor of this moment. But then the cub did something that changed everything. Instead of following his mother away from the humans, he walked over to Riley and gently placed his uninjured paw on her foot. Then he looked up at her and made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a whimper, and Riley suddenly understood something that made her gasp. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "He's trying to tell me something about his paw, the hurt one, something's still wrong." Grandma Luna knelt down beside Riley and looked more carefully at the cub's injured paw. What she saw made her heart sink. In all the excitement of freeing him from the rocks, they hadn't noticed that the paw was more than just swollen. There was a deep cut along one of the pads, and it was bleeding more than it should have been. "Oh, little one," she said softly. "You've been trying to be brave, but you're really hurt, aren't you?" The mother bear seemed to understand that something was still wrong, because she came closer and sniffed at her cub's injured paw. When she smelled the blood, she made a sound that Riley had never heard before, a sound that somehow conveyed both worry and determination. Then the bear did something that no one could have predicted. She looked directly at Grandma Luna, then at Riley, then back at her cub. She made a series of sounds, almost like she was speaking, and then she gently nudged her cub toward the two humans. "I think," Grandma Luna said slowly, hardly believing her own words, "I think she wants us to help heal his paw. But how do you treat a wild bear cub's wounds? And what would happen if they tried and something went wrong?" Riley looked at the mother bear's trusting face and felt the weight of responsibility settling on her young shoulders. This was no longer just about freeing a trapped animal. This was about proving worthy of trust that crossed every boundary between human and wild. The morning sun was getting higher, and Riley could hear the distant sound of cars on the road that led to town. Soon, other people might come by and see what was happening. She wondered how they would react to finding a little girl and an old woman giving medical care to a family of wild bears in their backyard. But looking into the cub's pain-filled eyes, she knew there was no choice. They had been chosen for this moment, and they couldn't let him down. The question was, did they have everything they needed to help him, or would they have to make a choice that might put everyone in danger? Grandma Luna's mind raced through the supplies she kept in her cabin. Living so far from town, she had learned to be prepared for emergencies. But treating a wild bear cub was not something she had ever imagined needing to do. The bleeding from the cub's paw was getting worse, leaving small red drops on the ground, and she could see that the little one was starting to weaken. "Riley, I need you to go inside and bring me the green metal box from under my bed," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation, "and grab the clean towels from the bathroom closet." As Riley ran toward the cabin, she could hear the mother bear making soft, encouraging sounds to her cub. The massive animal had positioned herself so that she could watch both her baby and the humans, ready to protect or help as needed. There was something almost human in the way she was handling the crisis, and Riley felt a strange sense of family forming between all of them. Inside the cabin, Riley's hands shook as she pulled the heavy first aid box from under her grandmother's bed. It was bigger than she expected, filled with bandages, antiseptic, and medical supplies that looked like they belonged in a real hospital. She grabbed the softest towels she could find and rushed back outside, her heart pounding with worry for the little cub. When she returned, she found her grandmother talking quietly to the mother bear in the same tone she used when comforting Riley after a nightmare. The bear was listening intently, her ears forward and her eyes focused on the old woman's face as if she understood every word. "I know you're scared, Mama," Grandma Luna was saying, "but your baby needs help, and we're going to take good care of him. You can trust us." The mother bear made a sound that was almost like a sigh, then gently nudged her cub toward Riley. The little one limped over on 3 paws, holding his injured foot up in the air, and Riley felt her heart break a little more with each painful step he took. "Okay, little guy," Riley said softly, kneeling down beside him. "Let's see what we can do to make you feel better." As Grandma Luna cleaned the wound with gentle antiseptic, the cub whimpered but didn't try to pull away. Riley held his head in her lap, stroking his soft fur and whispering words of comfort. The cut was deeper than they had first thought, and it was clear that something sharp had sliced through the tender pad of his paw when he was struggling to get free from the rocks. "This is going to need stitches," Grandma Luna said quietly, looking at the mother bear apologetically. "I can clean it and bandage it, but without proper medical care, infection could set in." The word infection seemed to mean something to the mother bear because she stood up abruptly and began pacing back and forth. She made a series of sounds that grew more agitated, and Riley could see the panic building in her dark eyes. "She knows what infection means," Riley realized with surprise. "She's seen it before." Grandma Luna nodded grimly. "Wild animals deal with infection all the time. She knows it can be deadly, especially for someone so young." The mother bear stopped pacing and looked directly at Grandma Luna. Then she did something that made both humans freeze in amazement. She walked over to the old woman and very gently took hold of her shirt sleeve with her teeth, not biting but just holding on, and began to pull her toward the forest. "She wants us to come with her," Riley breathed. But where? The bear released Grandma Luna's sleeve and walked a few steps toward the tree line, then stopped and looked back at them expectantly. She made a sound that was clearly meant to be encouraging, then returned to pick up her cub in her massive jaws, carrying him as gently as a house cat carries a kitten. "I think," Grandma Luna said slowly, "she's taking us somewhere. Somewhere she thinks we can get better help for her baby." Riley's mind immediately went to the small medical clinic in town, but that was impossible. Dr. Martinez would never believe this story, and even if he did, what were the chances he would agree to treat a wild bear cub? The whole situation was so far outside normal reality that Riley wondered if she was dreaming. But the bear was already moving toward the forest, carrying her cub and looking back to make sure the humans were following. There was such determination in her movements, such clear purpose, that Riley found herself walking after them before she had consciously decided to do so. "Grandma, should we really be following a wild bear into the forest?" Riley asked, but she was already several steps behind the massive animal. "Honey, I stopped trying to figure out what we should and shouldn't be doing about 20 minutes ago," Grandma Luna replied, grabbing the first aid kit and hurrying to keep up. "Right now, I'm just following my heart, and my heart says that little cub needs our help." The forest was different when you were walking through it with a family of bears. Riley noticed things she had never seen before. The way the morning light filtered through the leaves in patterns that looked like stained glass windows, the soft carpet of pine needles under their feet, the distant sound of a woodpecker working somewhere high above their heads. The mother bear moved with surprising grace for such a large animal, carefully avoiding fallen branches and holes that might trip the humans following behind her. She would pause every few minutes to adjust her grip on her cub and check to make sure Riley and Grandma Luna were still with her. After about 15 minutes of walking, they came to a clearing that took Riley's breath away. In the center was a small pond fed by a natural spring, surrounded by wildflowers that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. But what made Riley gasp was not the beauty of the place, but what she saw on the far side of the clearing. There was another bear. This one was even larger than the mother they had been following, with gray streaks in his dark fur that suggested he was quite old. He was lying on his side near the edge of the pond, and even from a distance Riley could see that something was terribly wrong with him. The mother bear set her cub down gently and made a series of sounds toward the larger bear. He lifted his massive head and looked in their direction, and Riley could see intelligence and sadness in his eyes that made her want to cry. "Oh my," Grandma Luna whispered. "She brought us to her mate. He's hurt too." As they got closer, the extent of the old bear's injuries became clear. His left hind leg was swollen to twice its normal size, and there were what looked like infected claw marks along his shoulder. He had been in a fight, probably with another bear, and lost badly. She's been taking care of both of them, Riley realized. Her baby and her mate, she must be exhausted. The mother bear walked over to her injured mate and gently licked his face. He made a soft sound in response, and Riley could see the love between them as clearly as if they were humans holding hands. Then, the mother bear looked at Riley and Grandma Luna with an expression that was unmistakable. She was asking them to help him too. Grandma Luna knelt down beside the old bear, moving slowly and speaking in the same gentle voice she had used with the cub. "Hello, old fellow. Your lady thinks we might be able to help you feel better." The old bear looked at her with eyes that held decades of forest wisdom. He sniffed carefully at her hand, seeming to recognize the scent of someone who had helped his cub, and then very slowly, very carefully, he extended his massive paw toward her. It was a gesture of trust that brought tears to Riley's eyes. Here was an animal that could easily kill them both. Injured, and probably in terrible pain, choosing to believe that these strange, small creatures meant to help rather than harm. But as Grandma Luna examined the old bear's wounds, her face grew more and more serious. These injuries were far beyond what she could treat with the supplies in her first aid kit. The infection in his leg was advanced, and without proper antibiotics he might not survive much longer. The mother bear seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, because she began making sounds that Riley had not heard before. They were soft and rhythmic, almost like singing, and both the cub and the old bear seemed to be comforted by them. "She's singing to them," Riley whispered in amazement. "She's singing a bear lullaby." But even as the beautiful, primitive song filled the clearing, Riley could see that time was running out. The cub's paw was still bleeding, and the old bear's breathing was becoming more labored. They needed real medical help, the kind that only humans could provide. The question was, how do you convince a human doctor to treat wild bears? And even if you could, how do you get a family of injured bears to a medical facility without causing panic in the entire town? Riley looked around the peaceful clearing, with its crystal-clear pond and carpet of wildflowers, and realized that this might be the last place these beautiful animals would ever be together as a family. Unless she and her grandmother could figure out a solution that seemed impossible, they were about to witness something heartbreaking that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The mother bear's lullaby continued, soft and haunting in the morning air, and Riley felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 3 lives were depending on them now, and she had no idea how they were going to save even one of them. But looking into the trusting eyes of the bear family, Riley knew she would try everything she could think of, even if it meant doing things that seemed impossible. Love had brought them all together in this magical clearing, and maybe, just maybe, love would show them a way to keep this family together. Riley closed her eyes and tried to think. Her parents always told her that when a problem seemed too big to solve, she should break it down into smaller pieces. The biggest piece of this problem was getting medical help for the bears, but maybe there was another way to approach it. "Grandma," she said quietly, not wanting to disturb the mother bear's lullaby, "what about Dr. Sarah?" Grandma Luna looked at her with confusion. "Doctor? Sarah? You know, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian who comes to your book club sometimes. You always say she's different from other people, that she really understands animals." A spark of hope flickered in Grandma Luna's eyes. Sarah Mitchell was indeed different. She had moved to Millbrook 3 years ago to escape the busy city life, and had opened a small veterinary clinic that specialized in wildlife rehabilitation. More importantly, she was someone who believed that all animals deserved compassion, regardless of whether they were pets or wild creatures. "Riley, that might actually work," Grandma Luna said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "Sarah has always said she became a vet to help animals, not to make money, and she's treated injured deer and raccoons before." The mother bear seemed to sense that something important was being discussed, because she stopped singing and looked at the 2 humans with keen interest. Her dark eyes moved back and forth between them as they talked, and Riley had the strangest feeling that the bear was actually trying to understand their words. "But how do we get her here?" Riley asked. "We can't exactly call her and say, 'Hi, Dr. Sarah. Could you come treat some wild bears in the forest?' She'll think we're crazy." Grandma Luna was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. Then her face lit up with an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. "What if we don't tell her about the bears at first? What if we just ask her to come help with an animal emergency, and then explain everything when she gets here?" Riley wasn't sure that was much better, but they were running out of options. The old bear's breathing was getting more shallow, and the cub had curled up next to his father, his injured paw still leaving small drops of blood on the forest floor. Okay, Riley said, feeling her heart race with nervousness. But what if she refuses to help once she sees them? What if she calls animal control or something? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Grandma Luna replied. Right now, we have to try. The mother bear watched as Grandma Luna pulled out her cell phone. The device seemed to fascinate her, and she tilted her massive head to one side as the old woman dialed Dr. Sarah's number. Riley held her breath as the phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. Sarah? It's Luna Chen. I'm sorry to call so early, but we have an animal emergency out at my cabin, and I really need your help. Riley could hear Dr. Sarah's voice through the phone, asking questions about what kind of animal and what kind of emergency. Grandma Luna answered carefully, saying only that it was a family of animals that had been injured and the time was running out. Yes, I know it's unusual, Grandma Luna said. But Sarah, I've lived in these woods for almost 50 years, and I've never seen anything like this. These animals need help that only you can provide, and I think you're the only person brave enough to help them. There was something in her grandmother's voice that made Riley's heart swell with pride. The old woman was taking a huge risk, asking someone to trust her without giving them all the facts. But she was doing it because 3 lives were depending on them, and that kind of courage was something Riley had never seen before. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'll send you the GPS coordinates to the clearing. And Sarah, come alone and bring everything you might need for serious injuries. This is going to be unlike anything you've ever dealt with before. After Grandma Luna hung up, she looked at Riley with a mixture of hope and terror. She's coming. She'll be here in about 45 minutes. The mother bear seemed to understand that help was on the way, because she made a sound that was almost like a sigh of relief. Then she did something that made Riley's heart skip a beat. She walked over to where Riley was sitting and very gently placed her massive head in the little girl's lap. The weight of the bear's head was enormous, but Riley felt honored rather than scared. She could feel the animal's trust like a warm blanket wrapping around her, and she began stroking the coarse fur between the bear's ears. It's going to be okay, Riley whispered. Dr. Sarah is really nice, and she loves animals as much as we do. She's going to help your family. The bear's eyes closed as Riley petted her, and for a moment they could have been any little girl comforting any worried mother. The species barrier had completely disappeared, leaving only the universal language of compassion and care. But as they waited for Dr. Sarah to arrive, something unexpected happened. The old bear, who had been lying quietly by the pond, suddenly lifted his head and made a sound that Riley had never heard before. It was deep and rumbling, almost like thunder, but it was clearly meant as a warning. The mother bear immediately lifted her head from Riley's lap and stood up, her ears forward and her body tense. She made a series of quick sounds to her cub, who limped over to hide behind his father despite his injured paw. "What's wrong?" Riley asked, but even as the words left her mouth, she heard what had alarmed the bears. Voices, human voices, coming through the forest toward their clearing. "I'm telling you, I saw tracks leading this way," a man's voice was saying. "Big tracks. Could be the bear that's been getting into garbage cans around town. Well, if we find it, we'll take care of the problem permanently," another voice replied, and Riley's blood ran cold when she heard the sound of a rifle being loaded. Hunters. The mother bear looked at Riley and Grandma Luna with eyes that were no longer trusting, but desperate. She had brought them here to help her family, and now they were all in danger from other humans who saw bears as problems to be eliminated rather than lives to be saved. "We have to hide," Grandma Luna whispered urgently. "If they find us here with the bears..." But where could a family of bears hide in an open clearing? And how could they move the injured father bear without making noise that would alert the hunters to their location? The voices were getting closer, and Riley could hear branches snapping under heavy boots. In just a few minutes, the hunters would emerge into the clearing and find them all together. The mother bear seemed to realize this too, because she began making soft, urgent sounds to her family, trying to figure out how to protect everyone. Riley's mind raced through possibilities, but they all seemed hopeless. The old bear couldn't move quickly enough to escape. The cub was injured and limping, and there was nowhere for humans and bears to hide together without being discovered. Then Riley had an idea that was either completely crazy or absolutely brilliant. "Grandma," she whispered urgently, "what if we don't hide from them? What if we try to change their minds? Riley, these are hunters with guns. They're not going to listen to reason from an old woman and a little girl." "Maybe not," Riley said, her heart pounding with fear and determination. "But they might listen to the bears." Before anyone could stop her, Riley stood up and walked over to the mother bear. She placed her small hand on the animal's massive shoulder and looked directly into those intelligent, dark eyes. "I need you to trust me one more time," she whispered. "I need you to show those men what I see when I look at you. Not a dangerous animal, but a mother trying to save her family." The mother bear stared at Riley for a long moment, and in that moment Riley felt a connection that went deeper than words or even thoughts. It was as if their hearts were speaking directly to each other, sharing the kind of understanding that transcends species and touches something universal about love and family, and the lengths will go to protect what matters most. The bear nodded. It was subtle, just a slight movement of her massive head, but Riley was certain she had nodded. The voices were getting closer, and Riley could see movement through the trees at the edge of the clearing. In just seconds, everything would change, and the outcome would depend on whether humans could recognize the humanity in creatures that were supposedly so different from themselves. Riley took a deep breath and prepared to do something that would either save 3 lives or put everyone in terrible danger. But looking at the bear family huddled together by the pond, she knew she had to try. Some moments in life demand everything you have to give, and this was one of those moments. The hunters were about to enter the clearing, and Riley was about to discover whether courage and compassion could overcome fear and prejudice, or whether this beautiful morning would end in tragedy for everyone involved. Riley's hands trembled as she heard the footsteps getting closer. She could make out at least 2 different voices, maybe 3, and the way they were talking made it clear they weren't just casual hikers. These were men who had come into the forest with a specific purpose, and that purpose involved weapons, and the kind of thinking that saw wild animals as problems to be solved rather than lives to be protected. "Stay calm," she whispered to the mother bear, who was positioned protectively between her family and the approaching sounds. "Show them who you really are." The first hunter emerged from the tree line, and Riley felt her heart nearly stop. He was a large man with a thick beard and camouflage clothing, carrying a rifle that looked bigger than Riley herself. His eyes swept the clearing, taking in the scene with the kind of quick assessment that comes from years of hunting experience. What he saw made him freeze completely. There, in the center of a flower-filled clearing beside a crystal-clear pond, was an 8-year-old girl sitting peacefully between 2 enormous bears, while an elderly woman knelt beside a third bear, gently cleaning what appeared to be infected wounds. It was a scene so far outside normal reality that for a moment the hunter couldn't even process what he was looking at. "What the hell?" he started to say, but his words trailed off as the second hunter appeared beside him. This one was younger, maybe in his 30s, with nervous eyes and hands that gripped his rifle too tightly. When he saw the bears, his first instinct was to raise his weapon, but something about the complete stillness of the scene made him hesitate. "Don't move," the older hunter said quietly, more to his companion than to Riley and her grandmother. Nobody move. Riley could feel the mother bear's muscles tense beneath her hand, ready to spring into action if she needed to protect her family. But the great animal held herself perfectly still, waiting to see what Riley's plan would bring. "Please don't be afraid," Riley said, her voice much steadier than she felt. "They're not going to hurt anyone." The younger hunter laughed nervously. "Kid, those are wild bears. They could kill you in seconds." "Could they?" Riley asked, and then she did something that made both hunters' eyes widen in disbelief. She stood up and walked around to face the mother bear, placing both of her small hands on either side of the massive animal's face. "Does this look like a killing machine to you?" The mother bear gazed down at Riley with eyes full of gentle intelligence. Then very slowly, very carefully, she lowered her great head until her forehead was touching Riley's. It was a gesture so tender, so obviously loving, that both hunters unconsciously lowered their weapons a few inches. "That's impossible," the older hunter muttered. "Wild bears don't act like that." "Maybe they do," Grandma Luna said softly, not looking up from her work on the injured father bear's wounds. "Maybe we just never gave them the chance to show us." The younger hunter was staring at the scene with fascination rather than fear now. "How long have you been here with them?" "About an hour," Riley replied, still maintaining her gentle contact with the mother bear. "Her baby got his paw stuck between some rocks near our cabin, and she asked us to help him." "Bears don't ask for help," the older hunter said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "She did," Riley said simply. "She looked right at us and asked us to help her baby, and when we did, she brought us here to meet her mate, who's been hurt in a fight and needs medical attention." The hunters looked at each other with expressions that were part confusion and part wonder. Everything they had been taught about wild animals was being challenged by what they were seeing with their own eyes. The mother bear seemed to sense that this was a crucial moment, because she did something extraordinary. She stepped away from Riley and walked slowly toward the two hunters, stopping about 10 feet away from them. Then she sat down, making herself look less threatening, and tilted her head to one side in what could only be described as a questioning gesture. "She's trying to communicate with you," Riley breathed. "She wants to know if you're friends or enemies." The older hunter stared at the bear for a long moment, his rifle forgotten in his hands. "I've been hunting for 30 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this." The younger hunter was watching the injured cub, who had limped a few steps closer to see what was happening. "Look at that little one's paw," he said. "He's really hurt." "We're waiting for a veterinarian to come help them," Grandma Luna explained. "But we didn't know there were hunters in the area. We were afraid. Afraid we'd shoot them," the older hunter finished, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame. "And we probably would have, if we'd found them under different circumstances." Riley felt a surge of hope, but she also sensed that they weren't out of danger yet. These men had come here to hunt, and even though they were amazed by what they were seeing, that didn't necessarily mean they were ready to abandon their original purpose. Then the third hunter appeared. This one was different from the other two. He was younger than both of them, probably in his early 20s, and there was something angry and impatient in his movements. He took one look at the scene in the clearing and immediately raised his rifle. "What are you idiots doing?" he snapped. "These are the bears that have been causing problems in town. We came here to take care of them, so let's get it done." "Wait, Jake," the older hunter said. But the young man wasn't listening. "No waiting. Those bears are dangerous, and they need to be eliminated before someone gets hurt." Riley felt the mother bear tense beside her, and she could see the great animal calculating distances, trying to figure out how to protect her family from this new threat. The peaceful moment that had been building between humans and bears was about to shatter into violence and chaos. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. The injured father bear, who had been lying quietly by the pond throughout the entire encounter, suddenly lifted his massive head and made a sound that was unlike anything Riley had ever heard. It wasn't a growl or a roar, but something that sounded almost like words, like he was trying to speak in a language that humans could understand. The sound was so startling, so obviously intelligent, that even the angry young hunter paused with his finger on the trigger. And in that moment of hesitation, they all heard something else, the sound of a car engine coming through the forest, getting closer to the clearing. Dr. Sarah had arrived. Riley's heart leaped with relief, but she also realized that the situation was about to become even more complicated. Now they had 3 hunters, 2 injured bears, a protective mother bear, and a veterinarian who had no idea what she was walking into. The young hunter with his rifle raised looked back and forth between the approaching sound of the car and the bear family, trying to decide whether he had time to shoot before the newcomer arrived. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Riley knew that the next few seconds would determine whether this morning ended in healing or heartbreak. The mother bear seemed to sense the immediate danger because she positioned herself directly between the gunman and her family, making herself the largest possible target. Riley could see in her eyes that she was prepared to die to protect her cubs and her mate, and the courage of that sacrifice made tears stream down the little girl's face. "Please," Riley said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Please don't hurt them. They're just a family, like you have families. They love each other and they're scared, and they need help." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the forest, followed by footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Dr. Sarah was close now, probably less than a minute away from entering the clearing and finding herself in the middle of a standoff between hunters and bears. Riley looked at the young hunter's face and saw something there that terrified her more than the rifle he was holding. He had made up his mind, and nothing she could say was going to change it. In his world, wild animals were dangerous by definition, and the only good bear was a dead bear. But as his finger began to squeeze the trigger, the mother bear did something that changed everything. Instead of growling or showing aggression, she lay down on the ground and rolled onto her back, exposing her vulnerable belly to the man with the gun. It was the ultimate gesture of submission and trust, and it was directed not at Riley or Grandma Luna, but at the hunter who was about to kill her. She was showing him that she understood he had the power of life and death over her family, and she was asking him to choose mercy instead of violence. The young hunter stared down at the massive bear lying helplessly at his feet, her dark eyes looking up at him with an expression that was unmistakably pleading. His rifle was aimed directly at her heart, and all he had to do was pull the trigger to end her life. But something in those intelligent, trusting eyes made him hesitate, and in that moment of hesitation, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stepped into the clearing and saw something that would change her life forever. Dr. Sarah froze at the edge of the clearing, her medical bag dropping from her hand as she took in the impossible scene before her. A young hunter stood with his rifle aimed at a massive bear that was lying on her back in complete submission, while an elderly woman knelt beside another injured bear, and a little girl stood between them all with tears streaming down her face. "Jake, don't," the older hunter said quietly, his voice filled with something that sounded like reverence. "Look at her eyes, son. Really look at them." The young hunter's hands were shaking now, the rifle wavering as he stared down at the mother bear. She hadn't moved from her position of complete vulnerability, but her eyes never left his face. There was no fear in those dark depths, only a mother's love and a desperate hope that this human might choose compassion over violence. "She's asking you to spare her family," Riley said softly. "She's trusting you with their lives." Dr. Sarah slowly picked up her medical bag and took a careful step into the clearing. "My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell," she said in the calm voice she used with frightened animals. "Luna called me because there are injured animals here who need help." The young hunter looked at her with confusion. "You're a vet?" "I am, and I can see that these bears need medical attention." Dr. Sarah's eyes moved from the bleeding cub to the infected wounds on the father bear, then to the mother bear still lying in submission at Jake's feet. "The question is, are you going to let me help them, or are you going to make me watch you kill a family that's done nothing but ask for help?" Something in her voice, combined with the sight of the trusting bear at his feet, finally broke through the young hunter's anger. His rifle slowly lowered, and he stepped back, his face filled with confusion and something that might have been shame. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "They're supposed to be dangerous." "They are dangerous," the older hunter replied. "A mother protecting her family is the most dangerous thing in any species, but look at what she chose to do instead of fighting." The mother bear seemed to sense that the immediate threat had passed, because she slowly rolled back onto her feet and walked over to Riley. She gently nuzzled the little girl's face with her massive head, and Riley wrapped her arms around the bear's neck in a hug that spoke louder than any words could have. Dr. Sarah watched this extraordinary display of trust and love, then squared her shoulders and walked over to examine the injured cub. "Okay, little one," she said softly. "Let's take a look at that paw." What followed was the most unusual medical procedure any of them had ever witnessed. Dr. Sarah worked with professional efficiency, cleaning and stitching the cub's wounded paw, while the mother bear watched every move with keen attention. The cub whimpered softly during the procedure, but he never tried to pull away, as if he understood that this strange, furless creature was trying to help him. The three hunters stood quietly at the edge of the clearing, their weapons forgotten as they watched a veterinarian treat wild bears as gently as she would treat someone's beloved pet. The older hunter pulled out his cell phone and made a quiet call, speaking in hushed tones to someone about canceling their hunting plans. When Dr. Sarah moved on to treat the father bear's infected wounds, the massive animal allowed her to touch him without the slightest resistance. She cleaned the claw marks on his shoulder and administered antibiotics for the infection in his leg, talking to him in the same soothing voice she used with all her patients. "You're going to be fine, big fellow," she murmured as she worked. "These wounds look worse than they are. With proper care, you'll be back to normal in a few weeks." The father bear made that sound again, the one that was almost like words, and Dr. Sarah paused in her work to look into his eyes. What she saw there made her smile with wonder. "You're welcome," she said simply, and somehow, everyone in the clearing knew that a real conversation had just taken place. As Dr. Sarah finished her work, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light through the trees and making the wildflowers around the pond glow like jewels. The mother bear gathered her family close to her, and for a moment they were just three bears enjoying a peaceful morning by a beautiful pond. But then the mother bear did something that would stay with everyone present for the rest of their lives. She walked over to each of the humans in turn, Riley, Grandma Luna, Dr. Sarah, and even the three hunters, and gently touched each one with her massive paw. It was a gesture of gratitude so profound that several of the grown men found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. When she reached Jake, the young hunter who had been ready to kill her just minutes before, she paused for a long moment. He stood perfectly still as she sniffed at his face, then very gently placed her paw on his chest, right over his heart. She forgives you, Riley said softly. She knows you were scared, and she forgives you. Jake's rifle slipped from his hands and fell to the ground with a soft thud. He stared at the bear's gentle face, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The mother bear made a soft sound that seemed to say she understood, then returned to her family. The cub was already testing his bandaged paw, taking careful steps around the edge of the pond, while his father rested more comfortably now that his infections were being treated. Dr. Sarah packed up her medical supplies and looked around the clearing with amazement. "In 20 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this," she said. "These bears aren't just intelligent. They're emotionally sophisticated in ways we're only beginning to understand." The older hunter nodded slowly. "Makes you think differently about a lot of things, doesn't it?" As the morning wore on, the humans began to make their way back through the forest, leaving the bear family to rest and heal in their peaceful clearing. But the experience had changed all of them in ways that would ripple out through their lives like stones thrown into still water. Riley walked hand in hand with her grandmother, her heart full of joy and wonder. She had learned that love really could bridge any gap, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was choose trust over fear. Dr. Sarah drove back to town with a new understanding of her calling as a healer. She would spend the rest of her career advocating for wildlife conservation and studying the emotional lives of animals, inspired by a morning when a bear family had trusted her with their lives. The 3 hunters each went their separate ways, but none of them would ever pick up a rifle again. Instead, they would become storytellers, sharing the tale of the day they met a bear family who taught them that wild animals weren't so different from humans after all. And in the clearing by the crystal pond, as the afternoon sun warmed their fur and the wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze, a mother bear watched her cub play on his healing paw while her mate rested peacefully beside her. She had trusted strangers with everything she held dear, and that trust had saved her family. The forest was full of wonders she knew, but the greatest wonder of all was the capacity for love that existed in every living heart, whether that heart beat in the chest of a bear, a human, or any of the countless creatures who shared this beautiful, complicated world. As evening approached and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the mother bear's lullaby drifted through the trees once more, carrying with it a message of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living things. Some stories end with happily ever after, but this story ends with something even better. It ends with understanding, compassion, and the knowledge that when we choose love over fear, miracles become possible. The clearing remained peaceful as night fell, protected by the kind of magic that happens when different species recognize the universal language of the heart. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening breeze, you could still hear the echo of a bear mother's lullaby, singing her family to sleep under a canopy of stars.